So we've just seen humans are bent timber, and that means humanity and every single human person needs fixing. We need somehow to be made new. And this relates to one of Alan's questions just now, which is tied to anthropology. I think there's a huge amount of attention given to the question, how can we be made new? We know something's wrong, so what's the fix for us? And you can see humanism, which is a way of describing a core movement in our civilization, which for 500 years has been dominant, and it's a grand attempt to redeem humanity. And you can see humanism really as being a revolt against God, and then a belief in our limitless capacity to bring good to the world, to engineer our own redemption, to create a utopia of our making, to create heaven on earth. And we can look at the history of humanism and say, well, how has this worked out? And we have to acknowledge that in many respects, humanism has been a triumph. In the West, we've never been so well fed and so well nourished. You think about all the remarkable advances in healthcare, pharmaceuticals, surgical techniques. These things have vastly improved our lifespan. We're generally well off. We don't struggle to pay the bills, although some are at the moment. But you can say in so many respects, humanism really has been a triumph for making life better. But with all this improvement to our material well-being, I think another question has to be asked, and it's this: has humanism enriched human life internally on the soulish side? So are humans happier in the redemption project that it's put to us? Are humans today living with deeper meaning because of what humanism has offered? And has humanism made us more virtuous? Has it created better character in terms of human life? Now, I'm going to argue that while humanism has done some wonderful things to make life better, it's also achieved the very opposite of the good life. And I see humanism today, it's had lots of different iterations, but I see modern humanism today running the risk of what C.S. Lewis called the abolition of man. Now, to get at this, I want to think about two arms that humanism has worked with through the ages. The first arm to redeem humanity that humanism has worked with, I'm calling soul production. And this is something very much designed for the software side. The second arm of humanism, I'm calling the technical. This is how humanism has employed science and technology to raise our lives to a higher level. And today, as I'm going to show you, this is very much on the hardware side. So let's take a very brief look at both. Let's think for a moment about soul production. Soul production is about programming how we think. And it does this with the express intention of saving us, of fixing us. So soul production is targeted to how humans perceive the world. Now, the master of soul production was Joseph Stalin. And he said this: our tanks are worthless, thinking about the engines of war, our tanks are worthless if the souls who must steer them are made of clay. That is why I say the production of souls is more important than that of tanks. Man is reshaped by life itself, and those of you here must assist in reshaping his soul. That is what is important, the production of human souls. And that is why I raise my glass to you, writers, to the engineers of the souls. So soul production, we could say, is a kind of propaganda to get people to think and behave in certain ways. Now, humanism has done this in different ways. You could look at the political ideologies that have dominated different eras of the humanist period. Political ideologies are implementing political ideals in order to make us good. And what's interesting is that political ideologies always parody the Bible's account of sin and salvation. So you think of liberalism, modern liberalism. This targets the tyrannical rule of a few. That's the problem of the world. That's the sin problem. Just a few have power. But then it idealizes a solution as the autonomous individual who grasps their rights and freedom. That's the path to redemption. Now, we don't have time to go into it, but I'm arguing that political ideologies have been a form of soul production, the engineering of the soul in the modern world, in the humanist frame, in order to make us right. And we could also see how they haven't worked. They haven't been able to do that. Now today, there's another form of soul production that I think is really important for our understanding. This soul production is carried out by corporations like Google, Amazon, Meta, and Apple. There are academics who have called this Gamma. Google, Amazon, Meta, Apple, G-A-M-A, and there are others beside them. Now, these corporate, media-driven entities have the power to reprogram us like nothing else. In terms of soul production, Gamma can do it in a way that the Soviet Gulag couldn't, and the propaganda machines of the Soviets couldn't. There's a woman who's done some good work here, Shoshana Zuboff. She's an academic who wrote about surveillance capitalism, and she reminds us that Gamma uses methods that intentionally bypass our awareness, disappearing into the background of all things. And it's this bypassing of our awareness that makes it all so dangerous. She talks about Gamma who know everything about us, whereas their operations are designed to be unknowable to us. They accumulate vast domains of new knowledge from us, but not for us. They predict our futures for the sake of others' gain, not ours. And the point she makes, and many others are doing that too, the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, is all about this. The power of Gamma is really soul production, engineering our internal life in terms of what we desire, what we want, what we aspire to, what we feel, how we think. And the cost of this kind of soul production in our stage of humanism is very high. Zuboff says, an information civilization shaped by surveillance capitalism and its new instrumentarian power will thrive at the expense of human nature. And listen to what she says, and will threaten to cost us our humanity. Now, this is a massive subject I'm opening up. I'm just saying there is a form of soul production going on in our lives constantly, which is very dangerous to our humanity. Now, this is one of the ways that humanism is engineering a salvation. But the point is, it comes at great cost to our souls. Now, here's a massive subject I raise and I leave behind: soul production and how the modern world does that. The second arm that I mentioned is the technical one. And here the redemption strategy isn't so much about conditioning our internal life, but directly targeting what's wrong in our biology, in our hardware. So in his book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, Yuval Noah Harari puts it like this: we are living in a technical age. Many are convinced that science and technology hold the answers to all our problems. We should just let the scientists and technicians go on with their work, and they will create heaven here on earth. Technology holds the answers to all our problems. That will create heaven here on earth. Now, this approach to making us new aligns perfectly with naturalism and what we've been calling the hardware account. Any fix for our humanity has to be wrought within the realm of the material. Now, the movement I want to highlight here is known as transhumanism. Most of you probably would have heard of this. Transhumanism is a movement that's been around for 30, 40 years. It's growing all the time. It attracts a massive amount of time and money, especially in the corporate worlds. Gamma are putting lots of money into transhumanism. And what can we say about transhumanism? Well, what's interesting about it is it's actually a revolt against nature. So nature is seen as something which limits us. Nature imprisons us. So humanism's first revolt was against God. Its second revolt is against nature, because nature limits us. It makes us sick. Being part of nature, we're prone, subject to disease. Nature limits us in terms of our memory function. Because of our imprisonment in nature, we're going to die. We are mortal. And transhumanism says we have to break the imprisonment of nature. We've got to revolt against nature and raise ourselves to another level. As Harari puts it, and having raised humanity above the beastly level of survival struggles, so we eat it well enough, we've got shelter and housing, a basic income that's okay. We now, he says, aim to upgrade humans into gods and to turn Homo sapiens into Homo Deus. And this upgrade is what transhumanism is all about. Now, it's in its very early stages, and most of it is much more fantasy than it is reality. Its most famous spokesperson is a man called Ray Kurzweil. He's famous for his book, The Age of Spiritual Machines. John Gray says this is science recycled as religion, spiritual machines. He also wrote a book called The Singularity is Near. And he's deliberately here echoing the words of John the Baptist, Matthew 3, verse 2, the kingdom of heaven is near. He's saying the singularity is here. And for him, the great singularity is at the point at which humans, biological humans, are transformed into machines. So when the biological is merged with the technical, our bodies will become incorruptible. We'll be immune to disease and decay. And many transhumanists have the goal of our becoming immortal. This is part of our revolt against nature. We've got to escape our imprisonment and raise ourselves to the level of the machine. Now, there's lots of good books which deal with this. One I recommend is called To Be a Machine by Mark O'Connell. To Be a Machine by Mark O'Connell. Now, wherever transhumanism lands us in the end, and I think we should be careful, even though a lot of it's science fiction, we should be careful not to just completely deride it. At one level, you could say holding a smartphone is a form of transhumanism. It's an extension of you. And in a sense, our lives are very much bound up in that piece of machinery. But wherever it ends, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this movement, we do know that it's going to be disastrous in terms of a redemption strategy. And the reason as Christians why we say this is because our revolt against nature is entirely unnatural. God has made us biological creatures. Nature, the natural world, is our habitat. This is how God has wonderfully designed it. And the problem with humanists is not in nature, it's to the core of our human existence. It's ultimately in the human heart, this internal side of us that we've been talking about. So any attempt to liberate human existence from nature is only going to enslave us to something which is much, much worse. And it's interesting, most transhumanists are quite clear, very open, that transhumanism is the path, and they think this is a good thing, to being post-human. They actually want to reach the post-human condition. That is, they want to abolish humanity, the abolition of man, coming back to C.S. Lewis's very, very important work. And actually in that book, Lewis calls all of this the magician's bargain. Here's what he says. It's the magician's bargain. Give up our soul, get power in return. But once our souls, that is, our very souls, have been given up, post-humanism, the power thus conferred will not belong to us. We shall, in fact, be the slaves and puppets of that to which we have given up our souls. Transhumanism is a direct line to giving up our souls, of being puppets to something else. So let's recap what we've covered so far. These are huge subjects. I'm saying humanism has had two arms in terms of making us new. The one is doing it through various forms of soul production, engineering our internal life, coercing us to behave and think in certain ways. But it's also on the other side try to redeem us in this revolt against nature with its transhumanist vision. And actually, the term for this, the term I've given this, is techno-humanism. This is the new form of humanism which is arising at the moment. It's techno-humanism. And both of these attempts to make us new are leading to our abolishment. It is the abolition of man, as Zagreb says. Gamma, who are increasingly engineering how we think, how we feel, how we desire, that is leading to the end of humanity. And I think we're living in a moment where the bankruptcy of humanism's salvation project is becoming more and more apparent. This isn't about redeeming us. It's moving in the direction of obliterating us. It's undermining the core meaning of what it means to be human. So this is where software, looking at its redemption strategies, soul engineering, soul production, and hardware, the transhumanist, post-human vision, it's important to understand these movements as they're happening today. Well, that leaves the question for the Christian, well then, how can we be made new? And of course, we have the answer. This is where the glorious good news of the gospel comes in. The gospel, which is the good news of what God has done in order to make us new, in order to redeem us. And the point of the gospel is what we can't do for ourselves has already been done by God. He's already accomplished everything necessary to make us new, to redeem us, to put us right. And that's what redemption means. It means getting us back to our true state. That's what Jesus' mission was all about, to make us new. And part of the gospel, the glorious gospel, is that Jesus, the Son of God, came in the flesh. John 1, verse 14, the Word, the one who was with God, who was God, he became flesh. And he didn't do this to abolish our biology, to help us escape our imprisonment to nature. No, he came to redeem it all, to put it back together. And he came to redeem all of us, body, soul, and spirit together. And he restores us, not through soul production, through propaganda, through engineering, conditioning how we think and behave. No, he invites us to what's true and good and beautiful, to what's real, and in that leads us into the way of goodness and truth. And the gospel says on the basis of his death, our debts have been canceled. That's what the atonement of Christ means. And that's not the abolition of us, it's the absolution of our guilt. Our guilt has been removed, our real guilt, because of what Christ has done on the cross. We've been restored by his grace. So we're familiar with this. But my point is, when you hold up what Christ has done to redeem human beings and hold that alongside what humanism is doing to try and redeem human beings, we have the solution in Christ, what he has already done. And that should lead us to a real sense of wonder and praise.